Hey guys, in this brief video, we're going to talk about executive orders. We're going to talk about Trump's executive order attempting to restrict birthright citizenship. And we're also going to talk about the court order that just came out of Washington that restricts the application of Trump's executive order attempting to rewrite the 14th Amendment on a nationwide basis, and why I believe this will apply to effectively shut down Trump's effort throughout the remainder of his administration. Now, first, let's talk about executive orders and what they are, because this is how Trump is going to attempt to legislate to go around Congress rather than going to the trouble of passing laws and seeking consensus when he has a very close Republican majority in the House, for example, in his administration. And the good news is executive orders are the lowest form of law known in the federal system. At the top, you have the constitutional provisions. Below that, you have federal statutes. Below that, you have what are known as administrative rules, basically something that's passed pursuant to legislative authority through a process known as the Administrative Procedures Act. And then finally, the lowest thing we have is what's known as executive orders. Now, executive orders are nothing more than a directive by Trump, the chief executive of the executive branch, to the agencies under his control in that branch, such as the EPA, FDA, or ATF, for example, about how they're supposed to behave. So that's all it is. It doesn't override statutes. It doesn't override constitutional provisions. And that's exactly why his effort to restrict birthright citizenship was struck down today. We'll get into that and why the court's order is so important. Now, what is this executive order on birthright citizenship? Well, first, birthright citizenship is a doctrine that existed in the common law of the United States and even before the 14th Amendment, but it was enshrined specifically in the 14th Amendment as having constitutional power and being of the highest form of law we have in this country. And what it basically says that if you are physically born in this country within its geographic borders, regardless of the immigration status of your parents, you are a citizen of the United States. Now, there's not only that constitutional provision, but there's also an 1898 case dealing with Chinese nationals and a child that was born to those two Chinese nationals in the United States, interpreting it, which seems to make it clear that Trump's executive order is blatantly unconstitutional. That's what the court found today. Now, what happened in the Washington Federal District Court is important. It's a Reagan appointed judge, okay? This isn't somebody who's like, a liberal as the people on the far right are going to try to paint it. It is a Reagan appointed judge. And the context in which this order came down is critical because it came down in the context of what's known as a temporary restraining order. Now, that's not a restraining order for a guy who's beating up his girlfriend. That's criminal. This is a civil case. And it was brought by 4 states. Looks like it was Washington, Arizona, Illinois, and Oregon, who sought on an emergency basis to have the court declare that this executive order limiting birthright citizenship would in fact is in violation of the Constitution and is unenforceable. Why this is critical is because to get that kind of order before you go through a trial on the merits and go through discovery and have that 1 to 2 or 3 year long process, because that's how long it takes to get to trial in a civil case in federal court, you have to show what's known as an extraordinary remedy. You have to show that you're likely to succeed on the merits, and you have to show that there's no other adequate remedy at law, and you'll suffer irreparable harm, and that the balance of the public interest favors you. Again, it's extraordinary, it's extremely rare, it almost never happens. Back in the dark ages when I practiced law, and I've obtained dozens of these, I know how difficult it is to get. I would say maybe you're successful in 10% of cases, and that's when you're only bringing cases where it's meritorious and the circumstances really justify it. Okay, so in Trump's executive order restricting birthright citizenship, the critical thing to understand, not only did he apply it to children of legal immigrants, he applied it to the children of parents, both of whom could be in the United States legally, but just under a temporary status, such as work visa, student visa, or temporary protected status, those kinds of statuses. Because there's a lot of ways that someone can be in the United States legally without being a U.S. citizen, without being a lawful permanent resident. And I think that's what the most outrageous component of this executive order is. Not only did it attempt to override the Constitution, but it did so in a way that it punished people and their children who did everything right and were here legally under the law, in compliance with the law. I mean, there are a lot of people in this country legally right now who are under a temporary protected status. Venezuelans, Ukrainians fleeing a war who are from Mariupol and who's, if they went home, they'd be raped, tortured, and murdered probably, or put into a filtration camp with their children kidnapped. Haitians who can't even live in their own country because of there's roving gangs and just crazy violence happening, and their lives are literally at risk. People who are fleeing true death and true genocide. Those people would be punished under this executive order, and that is sick and absolutely disgusting. Now, what happened in the court's order today, the things he said make me believe that this is going to get upheld on appeal. This Reagan-appointed judge issued the temporary restraining order, which will last for 14 days and will bar enforcement of Trump's effort to get rid of all birthright citizenship, basically. And then from 14 days through the end of the case, which could be years, he'll issue what's known as a preliminary injunction. Now, he hasn't issued the preliminary injunction yet, but I believe he will, okay? Because the standard for getting a temporary restraining order and the standard for getting a preliminary injunction is the same. It's the same requirements. And they've already had a hearing, and really it's a question of law. It's not a question of fact. It's a question, is this legal? They don't need to do a bunch of discovery and depositions and document requests to understand what happened. They know what happened. It's the simple legal issue of, can Trump do this? And the answer is emphatically no. In fact, some of the things the court said today was, I've been on the bench for over 4 decades. I can't remember another case where the question presented was as clear. As if that wasn't strong enough, the judge also said, where were the lawyers when the decision to sign this executive order was made? He said it boggled his mind that a member of the bar would claim the order was constitutional. Okay, federal judges are appointed for life. They're very conservative. I've been in federal court many times myself. I've never heard a federal judge talk like that ever. In dozens and dozens of times I've been before federal courts seeking temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions in civil cases. This is extraordinary. And again, it's a Reagan-appointed judge. Remember, injunctions in courts, even though we're angry at the Supreme Court for some of the things they've done in relation to Trump, and especially the Trump prosecutions and giving him certain forms of immunity, the fact is, in his first term, there were 64 temporary restraining orders and injunctions. 64 of these very same types of orders that stopped him 64 times and applied on a nationwide basis. So I think we can still count on the lower courts at least. But to me, this is such a clear legal issue. I don't even see this Supreme Court overturning this order. And it's not something that's going to be appealed on an emergency basis anyways, most likely. It's going to take a couple years for that to filter through the trial process and then to go up on appeal, most likely. So executive orders are of limited application and limited power. This executive order on birthright citizenship was wildly unconstitutional and was basically laughed out of court today. And it is not going to be enforced on a nationwide basis. It's dead and toast, dead on arrival. Okay, thanks for watching today's video. I hope it was informative and helped you to understand what's going on and what Trump's going to try to do going forward. Have a great day.